Okay, Genesis 8. The flood ends in this chapter. Genesis 8 is Noah's recovery from the flood. They will spend over a year in the ark. I think the earth was extremely different once Noah got off the ark, but it was still different from the way the earth is today. The destruction of the canopy will make a big difference, and so will the expanding earth. And add to that a tilt in the earth's axis. Verse 1. And God remembered Noah, and everything living, and all the cattle that was with him in the ark. And God made a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters assuaged. I forgot to mention I got my shirt here, Faith Like Noah. I mean, imagine being cooped up in that ark, trapped for over a year. You got to have some faith to believe God's going to get me out of here. God did something here. He didn't just let nature run its course and allow the water to drain. There was nowhere for the water to drain to. I still don't know what made a wind to pass over exactly means, but it seems he provoked something to pull the plug out of the drain. But I don't think the water went back underground. The ground is already completely saturated from 5 months of looking like this. Once the water escaped from the great deep, it's not going back. I find the only explanation is the expanding earth theory. I think the earth was smaller in Genesis 1. Starting with the flood, the earth started blowing up like a balloon. The continents aren't getting bigger too. It's just the expanding ocean floor that's getting bigger. Let's look at a map of the age of the ocean floor. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a section of the first video that I made years ago for Genesis 8 where I expand on this stuff. So I'm just going to let that old video speak.
Okay, here's the first image I want to show you. Notice there's red and there's yellow and green and blue, and that's on a scale here. The red is the newest, the most recently created ocean floor, so to speak. And as it goes yellow and then green and towards the blue, it is getting older. Okay. Now this scale is in millions of years, and of course, as a biblical Christian, I don't believe in that scale. I believe in a scale of thousands of years. But it still gives us a scale to go by. So red is the new, and the blue is the old. Let's look at a different map. Here's a good example of the Atlantic Ocean. I believe this all opened up, and this red area is the newest land formation, and as it's opening up, this is gradually getting older as it goes this direction, and older as it gets this direction. The newest area in the middle. Are you seeing what I'm saying? It's hard to put into words, but it's like the ocean is opening up. This continent and this continent is moving towards the west, and these continents are moving towards the east. They are going away from each other, opening up this ocean.
Okay, let me expand on that a little bit. I don't believe the continents, and I didn't believe this back then either, I just didn't really articulate it correctly in the first video. The continents aren't moving to the west and moving to the east. Instead, what's happening is this is opening up in the center, which effectively pushes the continents away from each other. Okay, they're not literally moving and then opening up the ocean floor. The ocean floor is opening up, which then effectively pushes the continents further away from each other. You know, imagine if these continents were taped to a balloon, and then when you blow the balloon up, the continents stay in the same place, but they get further apart as the balloon expands. Okay, that's the way to think of this. The reason why that's important is because if these continents were moving to the west, as I said, which is not exactly what I meant, then that would mean that the Pacific Ocean on the other side is getting smaller. But that's not what's happening. The Pacific Ocean is expanding at the same time that the Atlantic Ocean is expanding. So as they both expand, these just get further away from each other on both sides, like an expanding balloon. Okay, I just needed to add that to my previous video.
Okay, here we see another map. This is a full map, obviously.
Let me add one more thing, too, so that you understand what these maps are. These are geological survey type stuff that comes from governmental measurements. What do I want to say there? You know, the scientists of the world have gone down to the depths of the ocean and tried to figure out how old these ocean floors are, and there's a noticeable difference in some sort of way. I don't know how they're determining it, but there's some sort of a pattern here that can be derived from them. Now, like I said, their scale of millions of years is not the correct scale, but there is still a scale to be seen here. There's newer Earth, which is forming from the expansion, and then there's older Earth, which that would have been the original Pacific floor, and I'm repeating what I'm about to say.
But it's a flat map, so you of course need to understand that the bottom and top of a flat map gets distorted or exaggerated because of the curvature of the Earth. But you still see, you know, the new expansion territory in the middle here by the fault line. And look, it's doing the same thing over here by this fault line. All the fault lines are doing the same thing. They are expanding. This is somewhat new territory, and this is the oldest territory. This was probably the same ocean floor from the time of the flood or before. All the way over here, same thing. Okay, now I want to mention where I first heard of this idea was basically from this series from this guy, Richard Guy, and he has a book, and there's this video series here on YouTube called The Mysterious Receding Seas. The sea levels are dropping. There's a lot of ports, you know, ancient ports that used to be water that today are land. And it's not just sediment, it's because the water levels are dropping. And this series leads to the idea that the Earth is actually expanding. So I don't know anything about this guy's channel or anything, but you know, look up this series and give it a watch. It's intriguing to say the least. Here's another one.
All right, let me add something else to that. I have that series as a playlist saved on my YouTube channel. I unfortunately don't have a way of doing the same thing on Facebook, but you could find it there on the Jason Kelty YouTube channel, labeled as "Let My People Know." So if you, or just search it out if you want. Someday, what I might do is I might take those videos. It's a 6-part series where all the videos are short. You know, they're like only less than 10 minutes each. That was back in the day in YouTube when you couldn't do long videos. You had to keep the videos short. So it's 6 videos as a cut up. So someday I might download those videos and combine them so that they're just one long video, and then I'll be able to upload it to both ministry pages. But in the meantime, you can just search it out on YouTube yourself.
Just looks interesting to me. All right, there's also a guy out there named Neil Adams who is pushing the expanding Earth theory pretty big, and he's not a young Earth creationist, so he still believes in millions of years. So I think his concept is right, but his perspective is wrong. here he's got this idea. You can see here, this is where the continents, these are the Americas, North America here and South America, and this is obviously Africa. So you see this graphic here where they're closer to each other. And here's the Pacific side of things. Let's see what else we got here. Here's an idea of what everything looked like when it was smaller and closer together. And then there's things like this, and I think this takes it a little too far. When he tries to go back in time, he goes too far back in time. Whereas I think it was just, 6,000 years ago, all the continents were together in one place, and the Pacific Ocean was the only seas. So,
yeah, let me add this. Neil Adams, because he lives in millions of years, what he tries to do is he reverses things back so far where there's only land on the entire earth. But that's not how the Bible describes it. He should be taking it back only to the point where all of the landmass is together on one half of the earth, one side of the earth. I don't know if it's literally a half. And the Pacific Ocean, or the seas, as Genesis 1 calls it, is on the other side of the planet. That's how far back Neil should have taken it. So his examples where he goes back in time where it's all one big landmass on the entire planet, that's just going too far. He's taken it too far.
Watch these guys, Richard Guy and Neil Adams, and they'll give you concepts to why I believe in the expanding Earth theory, but I take it from a biblical perspective. Let's look at a couple of things here. I see how this seems to open up. This will fit in over here. You have to look at the continental shelf. You can't look at the actual coastline. The coastline means nothing. It's the continental shelf that you have to look at. But this will fit in over here. This whole area will fit, obviously, right around here. And then this groove of South America obviously fits in here. I believe this used to be connected in some way, and some sort of catastrophe broke through like breaking a dam. And then when we look over here, I admit this part of the world is harder to figure out what happened, because it's just a mishmash of volcanic activity, so I really don't know. But it sure looks like this section of Australia, or Antarctica, fits perfectly right up into here with Australia. So all the pieces seem to fit. How they fit together exactly, we don't know, because there's been a lot of erosion that's happened on all of these coastlines. All of them. So you're not going to be able to fit them perfectly like jigsaw puzzles.
Yeah, that little bit of lag in the playback of that video. Sorry about the pauses there. Okay, so yeah, I hope that intrigues you enough to consider the expanding Earth theory as a plausible explanation of how the floodwaters did in fact recede. It also will potentially give us a decent explanation of why there are earthquakes all the time. Because I think the Earth is still very gradually expanding, even today. And that expansion, very gradually, would create earthquakes. That makes sense. So it's not a salvation-based belief. So, you can believe me or you can throw it out. It doesn't really matter. But I think this makes the most sense. Okay, moving on. Verse 2, the fountains also of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained. We know the rain from the canopy stopped after 40 days and nights. We also know when the fountains of the deep stopped gushing out water through the fault lines after 5 months, when the waters reached their highest level. The waters went up for 150 days and then started assuaging. Now there's a fun KJV word. The waters had already started receding sometime before the ark lands. And that would be, the ark lands on the 5-month point. So at some point there, the ark was able to reach the ground. So, verse 3, and the waters returned from off the earth continually. And after the end of the 150 days, the waters were abated. That's another word, kind of like assuaged. That means now they're going down. This word abated elsewhere gets translated as the word decreased. So the waters are decreasing. And the ark rested in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, upon the mountains of Ararat. Remember I said last video, the date of the beginning of the flood was important. It was the 2nd month, 17th day. So the ark landed after 150 days, or 5 months. Just so you know, months used to be 30 days long, every month back then. A year was only 360 days. Something slowed down the Earth's orbit. I think this event happens much later, around 701 BC. That was Hezekiah's sundial incident. But keep this 30-day month concept in mind. And that's going to become important in prophecy. All of the mathematics of the flood here is showing everything to be within 30-day months. And the prophecy of the end times, for instance, Revelation 11 describes 42 months as being 1,260 days. That means that the 42 months are all 30 days each. That's mathematically proof there. And that fits in with the time and times and half a time, or 3.5 years. It has to be 30-day months for that to fit into 1,260 days, being 3.5 years. Okay, so the ark finally bottoms out after 5 months, but Noah's family can't rush right out just yet. Notice also that it says the mountains, with an S, of Ararat, and not Mount Ararat. There is a difference. Verse 5, and the waters decreased continually. There's that same word that was in Hebrew, the word abated earlier. And the waters decreased continually until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the 1st day of the month, were the tops of the mountains seen. It's now been 7 months and 14 days since the beginning of the flood. Okay? This can be a little confusing because it says 10th month. And that might make you start to think the flood is 10 months, but that's not what it's talking about. It's talking the 10th month of the calendar. But remember, the flood started in the 2nd month of the calendar, not day 1 of the calendar. Okay, so that can seem a little confusing, and it's the 1st day of the 10th month, which is literally 7 months and 14 days from the 17th day of the 2nd month, which was the beginning of the flood. So don't let the math confuse you here. It's now been 7 months and 14 days since the beginning of the flood. They only floated around for 150 days. Then the ark landed on something beneath them for another 74 days, bringing us up to this 1st day of the 10th month. Now they can see what they landed on, because the tops of the mountains are seen. Verse 6, and it came to pass at the end of 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made. And he sent forth a raven, which went forth to and fro until the waters were dried up from off the earth. It's now been 8 months and 24 days. That's 40 days later from the previous time marker. 8 months and 24 days since the beginning of the flood. He lets out a raven, and it never comes back. Ravens are smart birds, but they're dirty, thieving scavengers too. Birds symbolize sin in the Bible. And when I think of sin as a devil, an unclean spirit, like in Genesis 4, that symbolism makes even more sense. Okay? There's a reason that the story here is using a raven and then a dove. The dove comes next. Verse 8, also he sent forth a dove from him to see if the waters were abated, decreased, from off the face of the ground. But the dove found no rest for the sole of her foot, and she returned unto him into the ark. For the waters were on the face of the whole earth. Then he put forth his hand, and took her, and pulled her in unto him into the ark. And he stayed yet other 7 days. And again he sent forth the dove out of the ark. And the dove came in to him in the evening, and lo, in her mouth was an olive leaf, plucked off. So Noah knew that the waters were abated, decreased, from off the earth. And he stayed yet other 7 days, and sent forth the dove, which returned not again unto him any more. Where did the raven go? This is a little confusing to me. Did the raven just hang out on the top of the ark somewhere? Because there was nowhere else to come? The raven didn't come back to Noah at the window. But the dove did. But it seems that the raven didn't have a place to land either, like a tree or something. So it's a bit of a mystery. I don't think that breaks scripture and all of a sudden now there's an error. No. The raven had to go somewhere because we still have ravens today, so they didn't go extinct. So that's just a little bit of a question there. Where did it go? It might have just hung out on the top of the ark somewhere. But it didn't come back to Noah at the window. That's the important part. Now, it's been 9 months and 8 days since the beginning of the flood. The dove found an olive tree seedling that probably sprouted 6 or 7 days before and plucked off a leaf and brought it back to Noah. It wasn't a full-grown olive tree or a branch. Okay, that's a common scoffing question that a lot of people will say is how does a dove bring back an olive tree? And how did the tree grow so quickly? It was just a little leaf. That's what the King James says. The King James got it right. A dove is also a bird, but the dove has a clean, peaceful, harmless character to it. The raven represents unclean spirits or devils or demons. The dove represents the Holy Spirit. Verse 13, and it came to pass in the 601st year of Noah's life, in the first month, the first day of the month, the waters were dried up from off the earth, and Noah removed the covering of the ark, and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. It's now been 10 months and 14 days since the beginning of the flood. Noah now sees the earth is dry, but they still haven't gotten out of the ark yet. And in the second month, on the 27th day, remember the flood started in the second month on the 17th day. So now it's the 27th day of the earth, the 27th day, was the earth dried. And God spake unto Noah, saying, Go forth of the ark, thou and thy wife and thy sons wives with thee. Bring forth with thee every living thing that is with thee, of all flesh, both of fowl and of cattle, and of every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, that they may breed abundantly in the earth, and be fruitful, and multiply upon the earth. And Noah went forth, and his sons, and his wife, and his sons' wives with him. Every beast, every creeping thing, and every fowl, and whatsoever creepeth upon the earth, after their kinds, went forth out of the ark. So a year and 10 days later, it's now been 1 year and 10 days, God finally tells Noah to disembark. Verse 20, and Noah builded an altar unto the Lord, and took of every clean beast, and of every clean fowl, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And the Lord smelled a sweet savor. And the Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake. For the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I again smite any more every living thing as I have done. A little confusing here. The sacrificial system was already known since Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel. Here we see Noah doing it again, using the excess clean animals that were brought along. Remember, the clean animals were brought by sevens, not twos. God promises not to kill everybody again, and not to again curse the ground any more for man's sake. I'm honestly not sure what this exactly means. Revelation 22 verse 3 says, there shall be no more curse. So the curse didn't stop here. Was there some kind of curse specifically on the ground that got lifted here? Was God just saying he wouldn't add more of a curse to the ground? His response to this line is that man's heart is evil from his youth. So maybe it's because we are already cursed that he lifted a curse that was on the ground during only the pre-flood world. Whatever it means, the curse of sin will still exist until Revelation 20. Now, several years after writing this, what do I think today? I still don't know. I get the feeling, if we look at it, let's see. Said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake. The curse obviously still exists in Revelation 20, and that's when the curse is finally gone. So I don't think God is cursing it again. He's not going to add another curse on top of the original curse from Genesis 3. For the imagine of man's heart is evil from his youth. That's enough curse right there. He doesn't have to add more curse to the ground on top of the curse of sin in our flesh. This is possibly what it's talking about. Neither will I again smite any more every living thing as I have done. Now, when Jesus comes back and the day of the Lord ends up wiping out everybody with the mark of the beast, that's not every living thing that's going to get wiped out. It's just those with the mark of the beast. Okay? But there's not going to be another global destruction of every living thing, as it says here. That's not going to happen again until the end of the world, so to speak. Right? So that's basically what's being talked about here. Okay, 22. While the earth remaineth, seed time and harvest. That's spring and fall, really. And cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. This is the first we hear of cold weather, and the current seasons we now understand. I believe during the flood, the axis tilt of the earth changed from possibly 0 degrees to the current 23.4 degrees. This would be a pole shift. I could probably go on for a little bit here. Let's see. It is believed by many that before the flood, the earth was not tilted as it is today. It was 0 degrees, straight up and down. And that would, let me see if I can actually, it's not so fast. Okay, so let me make this a little smaller here. So if the earth is straight up and down, you know, a 23 axis is kind of like this. And I don't have the ability of tilting this program on a 23-degree axis. Unfortunately, it doesn't really work that way. But if it was straight up and down like this, according to the sun, then the sun's heat, etc., would be evenly distributed year-round everywhere. And the entire Earth, especially inside that canopy that's blocking out the UV light, etc., would make the entire planet more of a tropical paradise sort of situation. There was no ice caps on the top and the bottom. The entire planet was just a nice tropical sort of environment everywhere, evenly distributed. And that would be why Antarctica has tropical plant life underneath all this ice. Scientists have found that. They know what's underneath the ice. The ice is very, very thick. The altitude of Antarctica is very high compared to the other continents because of all this ice that's down there, just piling up on what land is actually below. And on the land below, they have found, I don't know how they find it, they dig down or whatever, they've found tropical plant life. Okay, so this land that is now Antarctica used to be a tropical environment long ago, before the flood. Okay, it turned into this ice land, not Iceland, but it turned into this big ice block after the flood. Just like the North Pole has all ice going on up here too, even though there's not land it's the Arctic Ocean up here, so it's not a big landmass like Antarctica is. Okay, so once the Earth tilts, and it had to have happened at the flood, not the dividing in the days of Peleg, it had to happen during the flood when, Kent Hovind explains that something struck the Earth. He thinks it's a comet, and that's what created the low temperatures, the ball of ice that a comet supposedly is. And striking the Earth could be what tilted the Earth. Let's say that's the 0 degrees it was at. And I'm going to tilt it towards us because that's all I can do with this program. It tilts because of the impact of the comet to about 23 degrees. And now it's on this curve, which now creates our seasons: winter, spring, summer, fall. And that's what the verse says. The verse says that will continue until the very end, shall not cease. Okay. This would also be a pole shift, and I put this into the video because a pole shift is the idea that the poles, which were 0, tilted. It shifted. I'm not very good at keeping my perspective with the camera. It tilted to 23.4 degrees. That's a pole shift. Now, we're going to see something like this again in eschatology. At the 6th seal, we see the stars in the sky rolling up like a scroll. And that's describing the same thing that would happen if the entire planet flipped over. Now, it might not flip all the way over. It might go from here to just here. It might go from here to here. We don't know how much it's going to go. But you're going to see the stars in the sky move very quickly like a scroll being rolled up. That's what the 6th seal describes. And that would be another pole shift. So that's why I put this in here, because the concept of a pole shift, while extremely rare in Earth's history, has happened once. And can possibly happen again. Maybe it even happened at the Hezekiah sundial incident, and it might have happened at the Joshua's long day in Joshua 10. But it's described, the beginning of this creation of seasons here seems to suggest that it happened then, and it's described in Revelation 6 as going to happen later on. So that's that. Ooh, what a big chapter, huh? Genesis 8. That's most of the drama. Genesis 9 will be the after effects, what happens to Noah and his family after they get off the ark. So we'll see you then.